Heart first leadership isn't what you say, it's how you show up, how you regulate, how you communicate, and how you execute when it matters most. We are Heidi and Ryan Sawyer, and you are listening to the Heart First Leadership Podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast, friends. Today I have another special guest. I keep saying that every week, but every week it feels like they just get more special and more special. Today is one of my amazing mentors, my original mentors in yoga, breathwork, meditation, all those incredible things that we use to grow, to heal, to transcend, to evolve, is Catherine Devine. If you guys don't know who Catherine Devine is, she's an incredible coach, healer, teacher, visionary. And her work is one where she uses, earth energy to help people to transform and heal themselves. And we go back, Catherine and I go back to Kokoro Yoga, which I'm trying to remember when that was. It was about 4 or 5 years ago that we were in that certification. 5 years ago when, we spent 2 weeks together on the mat. Catherine Devine, Mark Devine, getting the certification with Kokoro Yoga, which she is the co-author of Kokoro Yoga with Mark, and is also now an author. Recently, you launched a book about a year ago, Sacred Silence, which is a beautiful read. If you ever want to explore the power of silence, is what we're going to explore today. So, Catherine, it is such an honor, and I'm so excited to see you and have you part of the show and just to get a chance to connect with you. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ryan.
Yeah, this is awesome. So, Catherine, give us just a quick story about what is it that has led you to this place in your life where you are all in on being a healer, an energy work, this path of being a teacher. I mean, it's like, how do we explain to people what we do, right? Healer, visionary, teacher, coach, like all these different things that it encompasses. I like even the word like a guide. Like, to me, above all else, what you do and what you helped me understand is like you just guided us through an experience to be able to become someone who's able to guide themselves. Right. And so what part of your story do you feel like resonates the most to be able to share that lets people say, like, get a little glimpse into your life and why you're doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I think, the word guide is wonderful, facilitator. I mean, all the words don't describe it ultimately. I've had that conversation quite a few times with different people. It's like, what do we call ourselves? Co-journeyers, Sherpas, right? There's so many different things. But I would say what brought me to the path was ultimately first, right? Arriving on to the planet and being born in with the intuitive healing awareness that I had. And like many, there's an amnesia phase that happens. So like as a kid, you know what you're doing, or you just do it naturally, and then it gets socialized out of you. And so then it got socialized out of me, I forgot. And really what brought me to the path of teaching, and then, speaking about earth, the yoga, the breath work. I was an avid backpacker, spent a lot of time in nature by myself, as well as with a core group of friends. And I was a professional cook in Los Angeles. My life was really stressful. It was high pace, fast, and I was in physical pain. And so what ultimately really got me there was I got conned out of all my money in a couple years into being in Los Angeles, and I landed in Encinitas, California, where my family is, and went to a yoga class with my very first teacher that I did my 500 hours with. And there was something that got awakened in my heart that day in that class, a remembering. And I just knew I needed to do this training. And so that was where I turned the corner, I would say, into connecting back onto both feet on the path. And then just the journey of teaching. So I've been teaching now for 20 years. I've had different activations around the healing work. And I will say that I've actually resisted it quite a bit when it comes to doing intuitive healing work, facilitating space for people. And just these last couple of years, I've really acknowledged that that is part of my dharma, my purpose, and to put both feet on the ground, both feet on that path, and walk it.
Well, I am excited to hear that you're finally come to a place where, there's this acceptance a little bit. What I hear from you, that this is why you're here. It's part of your dharma. It's part of your purpose to be a healer. And, somebody who is in your presence and in that, from a student perspective, it was incredibly clear that that's your purpose. So, it's always so easy for other people to see maybe sometimes, but it's like this acceptance for our own power, our own gifts. So, a couple things you said there that I think are incredibly important to understand is you said that you were living this life that was very fast paced and your body was in pain. And, so when you found yoga, which is a very vast conversation, like some people, may not understand fully what yoga is, right? And all the different components of yoga. But when you found yoga, you began to remember, and that set you down a path of self-actualization, realization, of healing, right? So staying kind of in that road, like what was it that you feel like is the most impactful or powerful component of yoga that led you towards a place of healing, right? That was able to slow things down enough to where your body was able to heal and no longer be in pain and so on. Like, what was it about yoga and what aspect of yoga that led you to a place of healing for yourself?
That's a great question. And it goes to the topic of what we're going to talk about in that way of silence. Mm-hmm. It was really the meditation. I mean, the breath being the gateway into that meditation. And I'll never forget I really resisted, and I talk about this in my book. I really resisted sitting still and meditating. It wasn't easy for me. And I at first really thought it was kind of a waste of time. And then as I continued doing it daily, there was this one meditation, I'll say it was about 6 months into my practice. And I was sitting on my mat. It was, that silence, the breath, the beingness, the presencing to oneself. And I got a very direct image that I had like a metal shell or armor around me. And that all these identities that I held on to as who I was in that moment, and a lot of them being pretty damaging in the sense of like, I'm an angry person, the world's out to get me, like these certain beliefs that I had adopted and or just conformed to. I saw it in an image, and I realized there was a choice in that moment that I could either continue to live that way, or I could start to take down the armor and really live from a hurt space. And I will say that meditation is that vehicle for me that really woke me up. And I say it I think it saved my life. Not only because I lived my life fully more after, I've been meditating, but also I had a hard time, like one of my first thoughts was always like, just like super disappointed I woke up. And I was 25. So sad.
Right. Right. Yeah. So in that idea of meditation, the conversation that we're taking on here is the healing power of silence, right? And I remember you mentioning that at the very beginning of our certification, and me being very curious about it, and now that years later and however many hours of practice have gone into that, like I have become much more aware of the fact that silence is, to me, the most healing mechanism there is. Like the ability to be in that silence, to be okay with whatever's coming up, to not attach to it, to not identify with it, the sensations of the body, the thoughts, the images, the the beliefs, the different concepts we have of ourselves that are somehow conditioned from our past or whatever. When you're able just to let them all be there, they begin to dissolve and fall away. And what's left is who we really are, right? Which changes our self-concept. And then we are able to operate from this place that's so much more pure, right? So for you, like, what was that experience like? This idea of, interesting to hear, like, taking down the armor, right? Like, in that silence, what's that experience like when you first are aware, like, oh my gosh, there's this armor around me. What's that like to take that down? What's that experience like?
Well, there was a lot of resistance, because there was that part of my false self that said, no, wait, like, this is what keeps me safe in the world. And so there was a lot of grief. And I would say grief with in the phases of it. There was anger, there was sadness, there was denial, right? And there was also then an acceptance when I, in that meditation, said, okay, I'll do this. So those are, some of the stages of grief. And it was, there was a dance with what you just said about, like, these thoughts, these ideas of who I thought I was in that moment. And then this kind of like glimpse into that there's a deeper truth about who you are. And so looking at that resistance and saying, okay, I'm going to get curious about this deeper truth about who I am, which is more of a vibrational field than an identity in itself. And so that took courage. It took surrender, which I didn't like that word at the time. Right. Vulnerability. I didn't like being vulnerable. All those, so surrender, vulnerability, and kind of putting my palms up to, the universe and saying, okay, I got it. And I'll say that, as a small kid, I went to church and sang in the choir by myself for years. I really loved being at church, and my family didn't go, and I went by myself. And I think there was also a remembering of this connection that I was part of something bigger, and that was more true of who I was.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's remembering. And you said that from the very beginning too, right? When we kind of let go of the things who are not, remember who we really are. So what is it about silence? Like, could you give me, as somebody, like, pretending like I don't know anything about it, right? We're day one of Kokoro yoga. We're back on the mat together in person. And you are, giving us a taste of why are we here? What are we exploring? What are we seeking, and why, right? So, like, what is it about silence that makes it so transformative and so healing?
We are all leaders. If you're ready to stop waiting and start impacting your environment in a powerful way, we want to connect with you. Click the Book Now link in the show notes to book a call with a Heart First coach and discover what Heart First leadership can look like in your life and in your environment. Now back to the show.
That's a great question. I will first say that what I would say is we're not here to seek, we're here to remember. The seeking, the looking for something is a distraction to the path and the practice itself. And with the power of silence, what I would say about that is we live more and more. I mean, my goodness, like, again, when I started, like, the internet wasn't even really, it was a spark of a thing, but it wasn't what it is now. Just everything that technology is. But we live in a very fast society at this point. It's loud. There are images, sounds, so much coming at us all the time. And it's a lot for our capacity to process. And so we're having to filter constantly all this information and how it lands in our subconscious as well as our conscious. is it affects our lives, it affects our days. Like we can hear a song, we can see an image that might actually, if we're not aware of how we're feeling or how we woke up or what happened, 5 minutes ago, it can turn our day into a good point or a more negative point. So I'd say that that's part of the silence being so healing, because we start to notice our reactions to the stimuli. And noticing reaction helps us not be reactive and take more action. And in that, when we're able to be in action, we're more in free agency if we're in connection to our true self. And being free agents in that connection allows us to live more in alignment with our truth instead of where all the stimulus is trying to point us, right? And I would say, especially in Western culture, there's a lot of consumerism. There's a lot of noise that doesn't want us to presence ourselves and connect with more of that truth and that journey. And there's a lot you can unpack there, right, around social change, environmentalism. And so going to the silence piece, why is it so challenging? I mean, how many times have I heard, but thousands of people I've heard, I can't sit still. I can't sit in that silence. And it's like, oh yeah, you can. I didn't want to either. And why? Because we're uncomfortable. Well, if we're uncomfortable with ourselves and we can't even sit with ourselves in a quiet space, how present are we in any relationship we're in, whether it's professional or personal? Again, are we being agents in positive, and positive not great might be the world, but being more of an elevating force in this world versus playing into what's happening and possibly doing damage to others, to ourselves. So that silence kind of, it starts to erode that I can't sit with myself. I can't even sit still, and then getting to know oneself so that, again, we can be present. We can actually get to know another human being, which connection is so important. We're hardwired for connection as human beings. That's been proven by science. Community is so important. So the more, again, we can be with ourselves, the more I think we can be of service. And that's the power of silence, being of service, to overall community.
Yeah, so you said a ton there. One of the, the end there is about like enough time in silence. Eventually, potentially, you might even find your calling, right? You find meaning and purpose in life. But to like scale back to the very beginning of what you mentioned, one of the things that we do within the work that we do with integrated performance is to understand be very, very clear. We do an inventory of like, what information are we taking in? Right. And so that's, screen time, obviously, social media, news, even the music. I have now done enough work personally where it's like the other day, my wife and I watched a show, The Modern Family. Like we don't watch hardly any TV, but when we do, we like to laugh a little bit. We sort of put like a sitcom on of some sort, right? Seinfeld or Modern Family or something. And the next morning in my meditation, I see Phil Dunphy. I'm like, oh, what's Phil doing in here? Right. And it's amazing how much that influences our subconscious mind. Right. And imprints into our nervous system. We're not even aware of how much information is coming in. And, I heard this once, Catherine, I don't know if this is true or not, but that 100 years ago, compared to today, in 1 week's time, the average teenager or, the 25-year-old, that age group, is taking in more information than we would have in a whole entire lifetime, 100 years ago. I may have even learned that from you, potentially. I'm not even sure where I learned that from, but.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah. And then to be unaware of the fact of how much that impacts our decision-making, our ability to connect, even just our concept of ourselves, our ability to feel safe in our own bodies, our own environments, and then therefore in the world to like take chances and risk and be courageous. So to slow down enough to know like what's going on in there. Right. And for me, that was part of my journey of like overcoming, what at one point was experienced as suicidal depression. Was like, once I started to sit still and be like, well, what was that? And where did that come from? And and really not even having any idea, not having to understand it, just realizing like that's in there. It's time to like excavate it out. Right. Like legitimately the silence is like taking an excavator into your subconscious mind and be like, that doesn't belong, and like dumping it off to the side, like set that down. And just being aware of like how much is going in. We now basically only watch like Disney movies in our house. Like it's only if it's like happy and joyful and positive and loving that we even turn something on in our own home, This ability to notice and not attach. So when we're in meditation, we're in silence, and now we've maybe got past the point of being still long enough to actually notice, right? Because stillness comes first. You have to actually sit still long enough to even be able to pay attention to notice. What is that? I mean, people talk about like non-attachment, and letting go and surrender, and to be curious and all these different things, all these words that we had thrown out. But that ability to notice and not to feed the narrative, to not like attach to the actual story that your mind is telling, or the concept of yourself, or the belief, like can you help me unpack that a little bit further? Like this ability just to notice without being involved in what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll say what you just said too, like, the word surrender, let go, it was, those words even in some ways sometimes imply an action still. So there's just like a softening, right? Opening, like, sea anemones that like open up and then they close if you like to touch them in the tide pools. It's that like letting our soft bellies be exposed, letting ourselves be really open. But to your question, one of them is, which, this is a big one, is recognizing that we're not our thoughts. And so it's like, what does that mean? Like, and I've been through some existential crises for sure around this one, where it's like, well, if I'm not my thoughts, like what, how do I choose what kind of coffee I like? Do I even, want to eat that anymore? Or do I like that? Do I not like? So it's, all these dualistic things of this is who I am, this is what I think. So there is a lot of attachment in that. So that goes to what is non-attachment. The first one is recognizing that, again, a lot of our likes are dislikes, and that links to our thoughts, all are really conditioned, and it's conditioned mind. And in some of the teachings, we even say that could, if you believe in reincarnation, come from a past life, and whether that's true or not, what I do know is we start getting programmed the minute we are born, by the stimuli, by who's around us, by what's being said, whatever, television shows being played in the background while we're being given a bottle, right? All of that is going into our being. When we're at a store at 3 years old and we see the advertising, those images play into our own identity. So non-attachment, starting to recognize a lot of the thoughts that are going on of, I like this, I don't like this is what happened and that makes me mad, this is what happened, that makes me happy. That those are all narratives, they're all stories, and they're not who we are. So then how do you separate from them? Well, the first one is recognizing that at least that you're going to buy in a little bit to playing the game of looking at that might not be who I am. Because I'm just going to accept like that's not who I am. That's, I think, for most people, not realistic. So it has to be like a buy-in, like, okay, I'll play the game. I'll play the game of like, maybe I'm not myself. So now I'm just going to watch them. And if I watch them, it's like kind of how the stock market has like the, numbers scrolling through. If I watch them in that way, what happens? And then most people notice when they sit and they start to breathe, and like you said, stillness being a prelude to silence. If at first they don't want it, just sitting still, it's uncomfortable. My body this, my body that. So it's like, oh wow, I'm super identified with my body. So let me get myself in a comfortable position. And then, okay, these thoughts are going, and And if I'm not these thoughts, if I'm playing that game, what am I? And then it's like, oh, but I just got into that thought about something that happened yesterday, and it took me 5 minutes, and now I'm realizing I was completely immersed in that thought. Let me come back to where I am right now. And that's sitting here, whether it's in a chair or on a cushion in a yoga mat, and go back to this game. I'm not my thoughts. That's the practice. That's the prelude to meditation. That's the prelude to stillness. And for most people, not everybody, they do that for a while before they're ever going to experience any sort of meditative or still state. Does that answer your question, Ryan?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Oh, thank you. And understanding, like, for a lot of people, I've been noticing, I've been teaching a lot more meditation here locally in Spokane. It's like, there's this idea that like breath, especially too, is some sort of experience. So like I did that once, or, like taking a meditation is like a loving kindness meditation, or feeling gratitude. Like that's a nice experience. It's a really good thing to like, allow for yourself to have, an experience or a moment of gratitude. But what we're talking about in getting to this place of silence being healing is like getting beyond, like there's a silence beyond the silence. And to get there, it's a skill. It's a skill that needs to be developed, of being able to be still, to notice, to just allow without attaching. And eventually your mind becomes to a place where it goes to a natural state of that stillness and wonder, where you're like, oh, that's what silence there's in it, and it becomes visceral rather than this auditory thing. That's I think the shift of understanding, like when I'm in a place where I'm like, oh, that's right, that's who I am, that's the truth of me, it's a visceral experience of complete silence, rather than, oh no, it's quiet out. Like, no, it's quiet in. It's quiet in here. What's the impact? And I know we've already kind of touched on it in a couple of different places. And I know relationships is huge for you. Communication is something that you are a master in, and so, so much of our world is based upon connection, and two people being able to converse. And I often say this jokingly, I think I've already said it a couple of times on the podcast, that it's amazing to me, as much now that understanding more about the human experience and about how each and every individual's experience of life is completely unique to them. Like, it's almost amazing that two people can sit in the same room and not kill each other. Because it's like they see in the world from two completely different lenses, right? You know what I mean? So when we do this work as a leader, as somebody who's a leader, meaning I'm a parent, I'm leading my children, right? I'm a leader of a team. I have businesses and I'm leading my teams, or I'm a coach and I'm leading a team, an organization, whatever that may look like. Like, what is the impact of doing this inner work and being able to use silence as a way to create more connection to ourselves, therefore to others? Like, what's the impact of that in our relationships in life? Because I think that's one of the main pain points in a lot of people's lives, is wishing they had stronger, more authentic, more rewarding relationships, whether it be with significant others or their kids or otherwise.
Right. Yeah. Well, you put it there with the, two people sitting with completely different worldviews. One of them is that if we can presence ourselves, so that understanding, and it's interesting about the silence being visceral in that way, that there's an expansiveness to it. And so that's also a piece, right? That this expansiveness, it's a vibrational field of presence in oneself too. And that may or may not land for some people, but when we can do that, going to interpersonal dynamics, a lot of people in conversation are either waiting their turn to say what they think, and then again, like especially if it is, like you said, with a spouse or a business partner, where if you're in a disagreement, am I even listening to somebody, or am I just waiting to make my point? And a lot of people unconsciously are just waiting their turn. And so that's one of the powers of having the practice of stillness, silence, is to be able to actually arrive in a space recognizing that there is going to be differences. There's going to be the different worldviews, but also the different vibrations of, like, I'm Catherine, you're Ryan. Like, we show up visually different in this world. And visually, what I mean in that way is that, you know, ultimately we're just matter being reflected by light, like everything is, like from that microscopic, it's a vibration. And so if I can presence to your vibration, my vibration, and listen from that place, we're gonna have a really different conversation. And, you know, it's said by many great teachers, masters, I'm not making this up, but listening is probably the most healing medicine you can give to another human being, to truly listen to them. And that takes presence. And so in communication, when we listen and we aren't waiting our turn, we aren't formulating the next sentence to keep the conversation going, people feel it. And if we take genuine interest in what they're saying and try to understand, although, like, can we, that's a philosophical question, I think, if we do ever truly understand another person's reality. But we can attempt in that connection that gets built from heart to heart, you know, being to being, there is a richness and there is opportunity for not only healing ourselves, but others if you're in a group. So communication from that point, if I recognize that I'm listening and I hear what words are being said, but then I can actually hear the tone, the quality, the pacing, I notice the person's breath, then I'm most likely also going to hear maybe what's being said underneath. And checking in with that, not to make assumptions, not to project or transfer my own stuff onto someone else, but checking in like, okay, I heard this is what you said. That takes presence to even hear it. I'm also picking up on this. Is that true? And that can deepen a conversation really quickly, because the person can respond, no, that's not true at all. And they may not even be conscious of that underlying thing. And or it's not true at all, and I am just projecting. And so just checking in with that, but then, oh yeah, that is true. If they were kind of unconscious of that underlying statement over the words or under the words, then the conversation just drops into like some real talk. You know?
Beyond the surface level. Yeah.
And I would say, like, imagine if we all just like dropped into that at the grocery store, at the coffee shop, at the beach, at the, wherever. If we just all dropped into that, it'd be a different world. It'd probably be a more peaceful world. So I think that's the power.
Well, that's what makes, like, somebody who's a good coach to a great coach, right? Or, is somebody who's truly able to listen without their own filter and preference and story and projection onto that person that you should or you shouldn't or whatever that may look like, right? Is to have done enough of their own internal work to be just here fully receiving, opening, and being able to just find any way possible to be of service to the other person without their own agenda, right?
Yeah, that's why I answered that question the other day around, like, what makes you a good coach? What have you learned over the years? And I said that I was like, I don't even need to know anything about somebody's like business, what they do. Right. I don't really even understand it, because what I can do is I can be present and I can hold space, and that in itself, because we all know, we all have our inner wisdom. So just holding space and being present as a coach, that opens the door for people in a way that, all the tools, all the things that get taught in training don't even touch. And that's my opinion, obviously, my humble.
Yeah, right. Well, I agree with you, so to wrap come back full circle, right, is like presence is the outcome of sitting still, being in silence, becoming familiar with yourself enough to know and to be able to cultivate the skill to be present. And now when you're present, you're able to connect. You're able to connect with yourself, you're able to connect with others. the relationships change drastically, because when somebody else is in a triggered state or whatever you want to call it, you're not making it mean something, you know. I mean, we had, my wife and I are sitting on the back porch a couple of days ago, and she was telling me something that she was really excited about. And I was like, oh yeah. And that's great. I love that terminology. She was reading a book about shadow work, right? And we do a lot of shadow work with people. So we're always talking about, shadow integration. And I was like, oh, I love that. The integrated adult. I love that term. That's really fascinating. And then I was like, how would that, and so I instantly went back to like my mind of like, how would we integrate that into our program? Right. Well, in that back and forth, like engaging conversations, she somehow thought I wasn't listening. Right. And I was like, I was totally like embraced and engaging with you. And I recognized how she kind of shut down. I'm like, I've noticed that you feel like I'm not listening to you. Is there something that is something else that you didn't feel heard or whatever? So in this conversation that could have let the rest of that evening down, where she was like, oh, he doesn't value me, and all these other stories could have popped up from that, she kind of sat with it for a moment. She's like, no, that's on me. You were totally present and listening and engaging and receptive to what I was saying. And I'm not sure what that was. And so we kind of just were like, look at that. And showed that little moment, compassion, where she was, for whatever reason, feeling like she wasn't heard. But then, I didn't make it mean something that she felt triggered, like this back and forth play, right? That could easily then just turn into like, we don't even know where it all came from. We got in a fight, don't even know how it happened and how often that happens, and especially in marriages, but in relationships in general, where if we're both online enough and present enough to be like, oh yeah, there was a disturbance there. I'm curious about what that was. That curiosity comes into play. And then we're able to come back in the next moment and be present again, like actually present again with each other, and be like, okay, now we can move forward. Now we can move forward. Yeah. I really appreciate this. This is a conversation I think that needs to be had more often, where we're trying to find ways to get this type of work into corporations, into leaders, to where, the idea of, doing more is not always the answer, whether that be more physical training, or more, management training, whatever. But like the real work could potentially come, and the real genius of interacting with the world and each other, and the healing component of it is like, if the more inner work that we all did as a leader or as a organization, like we would just find the answers would be exposed, and we would be able to collaborate and create things that aren't able to be created without that type of practice. So I just think it's so incredibly important to continue to have the conversation and continue to do the work that you're doing. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to hear from you, like, what is up front for you? Like, what are you right now working on? And what are you excited about? What's up front for you?
Yeah, I'm in a transition right now, which is exciting, and also a little, I'm in the unknown in many ways, which is taking a lot of trust and it being in the flow, and I would say a lot of faith. I just graduated with my master's in transformative leadership. So to your point of the leadership and, the connection, I just want to say one thing I really walked away from those 2 years of studying is, yes, if we could in organizations presence a little bit more and recognize that connection, and that we want to be in partnership, not domination, and get away from some of that domination model, and be more in conscious capitalism, because capitalism is not going anywhere anytime soon, right? So if we're going to be capitalistic on a global scale, let's be conscious about it. Let's be, again, in partnership, not only with other companies, with other people, but also with our environment, and recognize that the environment isn't outside of us, it's part of us. Like, we are those trees, we are that water. So that's, I think, part of what excites me about where I'm going next is I've always been kind of a, closeted environmentalist, in the sense that I've never protested or done anything really publicly around it, but I really, in my heart and soul and being, believe like the earth is the medicine, and the more that we connect to the earth, the more that we understand the medicine of being present, because the earth is just a generous being and gives and gives and gives. And so recognizing the partnership with the earth. So I think that is I know that's part of what I'm up to. I don't know how that's going to take shape, whether it'll take shape in writing children's stories, helping kids, because these next generations, to help them connect to the whales and the trees and the water and the bees and the importance of that interdependency. That inspires me. It also could take form in more speaking about it. And then really the healing work, though, that's where I'm putting, just in the last couple of weeks, Ryan, I had that deep breath, prayer, meditation. Okay, I'm putting both feet on the path. I've resisted this really for 16 years, since I first started seeing energy, feeling it in my hands when I was teaching classes, recognizing that I was facilitating space to come back, people to come back more into alignment, and then also activation. So help knowing that I can, because of what I've been gifted through my meditations, through my time in nature, that I can help facilitate space for people to be activated into more presence, as well as alignment. And meaning alignment, those different bodies, the energetic, mental, the emotional, the physical. And so for the first time in my life, I'm offering that. and I'm doing it on my own. I'm not doing it, through, let's say, a Trojan horse of another company or another organization. Just really kind of opening up my arms, my heart to the world and saying, here it is, let's do it. And so that, I have a feeling, will evolve in the different ways. Right now, that's just one-on-one sessions. And then, like I've done work with people where I spent the whole weekend with them doing energy work and healing. And, those clients are like, that changed my life. That was transformative. So I might do more of that kind of thing, where I actually will set up space for somebody for a couple of days, and it not just be an hour, hour and a half. And then also some sort of group holding space. And so that's what's ahead. And I know it's not super descriptive and finite. However, I don't know if I ever will be quite in that vein of this is what it is, and this is how it's going. I think it'll always be evolving and changing.
Yeah.
I'll say one other thing. What I have recognized with some of the deeper work I've been doing on my own is that the whales and the redwoods, particularly the humpback whales for me, and the redwoods, like there are record keepers. So there's something about that message I want to get out. There are record keepers. They're wise beyond where, some of the wisdom humanity feels that they hold. And if we can help sustain their environment and help them thrive, it's going to serve us in ways that we can't even fathom. Like, I don't know what that means. I don't even know how, but I just know that that's true. So that's been some of my deeper work. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, I'm just grateful that you're staying the course and doing the work, because I know how impactful, your work is, being someone who is one of your students and experienced that personally. And I love the fact that it's unknown, because that's where we get to make shit up. All right. We get to decide as it shows up, and just allowing for the universe to surprise us. So I'm super excited to watch you and for the whole thing to unfold. And, if there's any way that we can support you and to see that to come fruition, then let us know. So thank you so much for being here, Catherine. And it's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you for listening. Remember, leaders go first. Alignment matters. And the environment that you create is the legacy you'll leave. We'll see you on the next episode.